Happy New Year, legends. A brand new year means brand new content, bigger goals, and better vibes. If you're ready to grow and learn with us, smash that like button, share this video, and subscribe to join the family. Let's make this year unforgettable.
The first morning of the new year arrived quietly, not with thunder, not with fireworks, but with a stillness that seemed to ask a question no one was ready to answer. How will you love this year? The sun crept gently through the windows of many homes, touching walls that had heard arguments, laughter, silence, prayers, slammed doors, whispered apologies, and words that were never taken back. The calendar had changed, but hearts were slower to turn. The home on Cedar Street. On Cedar Street stood a modest house painted cream with fading blue shutters. Inside it lived Daniel and Miriam Okoye, married for 8 years. 8 years of shared meals. 8 years of shared beds. 8 years of shared disappointments. They lay on opposite sides of the bed that morning, backs turned, staring at different walls. The argument from the night before still hovered in the air like smoke that refused to clear. "You never listen to me," Miriam had said. "You never appreciate what I do," Daniel had replied. Those words had landed hard, sharper than either of them intended. They had carried wounds from past years, unfinished conversations, unresolved anger, moments when love was postponed because pride felt safer. Daniel stared at the wall and thought, it's a new year. But nothing feels new. Miriam stared at the ceiling, blinking back tears. "Lord, I'm tired of fighting." In the silence between them was something heavier than anger. It was distance. Not physical, but spiritual. Emotional. The kind of distance that grows when love is assumed but not practiced. Down the hall, their young daughter, Eliana, stirred in her sleep. She would wake soon and run into their room, smiling, believing her parents' love was unbreakable. Children often believe before adults do. Love forgotten is love withheld. Across the city, in a student hostel near the university, Samuel Adeyemi sat on the edge of his bed scrolling through messages on his phone. The group chat for his project team was already active. "You didn't do your part last semester. Stop blaming everyone else. If we fail this year, it's on you." Samuel clenched his jaw. He remembered how teamwork had turned into competition, how friendships had grown cold because everyone wanted to be right, to be seen, to be praised. "We're supposed to be a team," he thought bitterly, "but we treat each other like enemies." He tossed the phone aside and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere deep inside him was a quiet conviction he had been ignoring. Love is not just for family and romance. Love is how we treat people when it's inconvenient. But Samuel wasn't ready to respond in love yet. Not today. The wounds from last year still felt too fresh. Now in the workplace that forgot why it exists. In a tall glass building downtown, Grace Mensa adjusted her blazer as she stepped into the elevator. She was known as competent, efficient, strict. What few people knew was how tired she was. The office had become a battlefield over the years. Gossip, passive aggression, silent competition masked as professionalism. Smiles were practiced, kindness calculated. As the elevator ascended, Grace closed her eyes briefly. "Lord," she prayed silently, "I don't want to carry last year's bitterness into this new one." She remembered a verse her mother used to say often. "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God." She hadn't thought much about it back then. Now it echoed louder. Grace knew something had to change. Not just policies, not just strategies, but hearts. Back on Cedar Street, Eliana's laughter finally broke the silence as she ran into her parents' room. "Happy New Year!" she shouted, climbing onto the bed between them. Daniel and Miriam exchanged a glance over her head. Something softened. Daniel reached out, almost hesitantly, and touched Miriam's hand. It was a small gesture, but love often begins that way. Miriam didn't pull away. Outside, the sun rose higher, illuminating streets full of people carrying old hurts into a new year, yet unaware that this year, love would confront them, heal them, and challenge them in ways they never expected. Because when Christ is allowed into the ordinary moments of life, nothing remains ordinary for long. And this year would not be like the others. The second week of the year did not arrive with miracles. No sudden healings. No dramatic confessions. No instant harmony. Instead, It arrived with choices, quiet, difficult, daily choices. Because love, as Christ taught it, is not proven in grand moments. It is proven in what we choose to do when nothing forces us. 2. Breakfast without words and love without noise. In the Okoye home, breakfast was usually hurried. Plates clinked, phones buzzed, words were exchanged only when necessary. That morning, Daniel woke earlier than usual. He stood in the kitchen, staring at the counter, unsure of himself. Cooking had never been his strength, and pride had often excused his lack of effort. Love is patient, he remembered. Love is kind. He took out eggs, bread, and tea leaves. When Miriam walked in, she stopped short. "You're cooking?" she asked, unsure whether to smile. Daniel nodded, not meeting her eyes. "I thought I should try." The eggs were slightly overdone, the tea too strong. But Miriam sat down and ate every bite. Not because the food was perfect, but because the gesture spoke. No apology was spoken yet, no argument resolved. But love had taken a step forward. Later that day, Miriam folded his laundry without resentment. She didn't rush. She didn't complain. She prayed silently as she worked. Love was learning to stay instead of withdraw. The classroom where tension lived. At the university, Samuel finally met his project team in person. The room was stiff with unspoken grudges. Ao sat with folded arms. Naomi avoided eye contact. James tapped his pen impatiently. Samuel felt the familiar urge to defend himself. But something inside him resisted. What if love looks like listening first? "I know last semester was hard," Samuel said slowly. "I know I wasn't always at my best. But I don't want us to carry that into this year." Silence followed. Naomi scoffed. "So what? We just forget everything." "No," Samuel replied. "We forgive. Or at least we try." Ao leaned forward. "You're talking about forgiveness like it's easy." "It's not," Samuel said. "But Christ didn't say love would be easy. He said it would show who we belong to." The words surprised even him. They didn't fully reconcile that day. But something shifted. Hostility lost its grip. Love had entered, not triumphantly, but humbly. Love at work was an unfamiliar. Our face. Grace noticed it during the weekly staff meeting. Voices were sharper than necessary. Ideas were dismissed too quickly. One colleague rolled her eyes when another spoke. Grace had always responded with authority. Control. Silence. But this year, something was different. "Let's pause," she said gently. "We're on the same side." A few heads lifted in surprise. "We don't need to agree on everything," she continued. "But we do need to respect one another. We spend too much of our lives here to let bitterness define us." Someone muttered, easy to say. Grace met his eyes. "You're right. It's hard. But love that costs nothing changes nothing." After the meeting, she stayed back and spoke privately with two colleagues who had been in conflict for months. She didn't accuse. She didn't threaten. She listened. For the first time in a long while, people felt seen rather than managed. A gentle romance ignited. That Friday evening, Daniel came home carrying a small paper bag. "What's that?" Miriam asked. He shrugged. "I remembered you liked those almond pastries." She smiled, genuinely this time. After dinner, he surprised her further by offering to wash the dishes. "You don't have to," she said. "I want to," he replied. Later, when Eliana had gone to bed, they sat together on the couch, closer than they had in months. "I know I've been harsh," Daniel said quietly. "I've used silence when I should have used love." Miriam swallowed. "I've held on to anger longer than I should have. No shouting. No blaming. Just truth spoken in love." Daniel reached for her hand again, this time with confidence. Romantic love returned not with passion first, but with gentleness. Christ, the Maser. Of love. Across all these lives, one truth became clearer. Christ did not love humanity when it was convenient. He loved when it was costly, when misunderstood, when rejected. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for friends. Sometimes laying down one's life looks like laying down pride, harsh words, the need to win, the desire to be right. Aggression from past years began to lose its power, not because people forgot the pain, but because they chose love over revenge. When love is still being learned, There were still arguments, still awkward moments, still failures, but something sacred was happening. Love was no longer an emotion waiting to be felt. It was a decision being practiced. And Christ, who is love himself, was no longer standing outside. He had been invited in. By the third month of the year, the excitement of new beginnings had begun to fade. The prayers spoken on January 1st had settled into routine. The promises made to be kinder, gentler, more patient were now facing the resistance of real life. Because love, if it is genuine, will be tested. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Daniel came home late. Again. Miriam had waited with dinner growing cold on the table, Eliana already asleep. The old anger, quiet but sharp, rose quickly. "You didn't call," Miriam said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I was busy," Daniel replied, dropping his bag. "Work doesn't always give warnings." "That's what you said last year. And the year before." The words landed like a spark on dry ground. "I'm trying," Daniel snapped. "But it feels like nothing I do is ever enough." Miriam folded her arms. Trying doesn't mean disappearing. For a moment, it felt familiar. Dangerous. Like slipping back into the same destructive pattern. Daniel turned away, breathing hard. Then he remembered Christ, silent before his accusers, choosing restraint over retaliation. He turned back slowly. "I don't want to fight," he said. "I want to understand." Miriam's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to fight either," she whispered. "I just want to feel chosen." Those words broke something open. Daniel stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her, not to win but to reassure. Love had been tested, and it had chosen to stay. Samuel's team project hit a major obstacle. A critical deadline was missed. Accusations resurfaced. Voices were raised. "This is exactly why we can't trust you," James shouted. Samuel felt the familiar heat rise in his chest. But instead of responding with anger, he stood up. "If you want to blame me, fine," he said. "But I won't fight you. We either solve this together, or we fail separately." Ao laughed bitterly. "Since when did you become so righteous?" Samuel met his gaze. "Since I realized Christ didn't love me when I was perfect. He loved me while I was still failing." The room fell silent. Naomi spoke softly. "Maybe we've all been harsh." That day they stayed late, not arguing, but working, helping one another, apologizing where needed. Friendship didn't return fully yet, but hostility loosened its grip. At Grace's office, a serious mistake was discovered, one that could cost the company money and reputations. Whispers spread quickly. Grace knew who was responsible. In previous years, she would have protected herself and let blame fall where it may. This time, she called a meeting. "I take responsibility," she said. Gasps followed. Later, in private, the junior staff member responsible broke down in tears. "Why would you do that for me?" he asked. Grace smiled gently. "Because love covers, and because Christ covered me when I deserve consequences." The atmosphere in the office changed. People began to speak more honestly, help one another more freely. Fear gave way to trust. That weekend, Daniel planned something simple. No expensive restaurant. No grand gesture. He took Miriam and Eliana to the park where he had proposed years ago. As they sat on the grass, Daniel pulled out a small notebook. "What's that?" Miriam asked, laughing. "Reasons I still choose you," he said. He read them aloud. Small things, ordinary moments, acts of love she had shown without realizing. Miriam cried. Romantic love wasn't about passion alone, it was about being seen. Later that night, they prayed together, holding hands. For the first time in years, peace filled their home. Christ revealed through love. Across homes, schools, and workplaces, the same truth echoed. Love that resembles Christ. Forgives when it hurts. Stays when it's easier to leave. Acts when words fall short. Aggression from the past was not erased, but it was no longer ruling the present. Because Christ is love, and where Christ reigns, love is no longer optional, it becomes who we are. The fire did not destroy them. By the end of that season, no one was perfect. But everyone was changed. Love had passed through fire and remained. And something deeper was forming, something that would soon demand even more courage. Because the greatest test of love was still ahead. By the middle of the year, something unusual was happening. Not loudly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. People who had once carried themselves with guarded hearts were beginning to live openly. Love, once practiced in private moments, was stepping into the light. And when love becomes visible, it becomes a witness. At the Okoye home, neighbors began to notice. Daniel and Miriam laughed more. They walked together in the evenings. They spoke kindly, even when tired. It wasn't perfection. They still disagreed, but they disagreed without cruelty. One evening, a neighbor remarked casually, "You two seem different this year." Daniel smiled. "We decided to love on purpose." Miriam added softly, "and to forgive faster." Romantic love had matured, no longer driven by emotion alone, but by commitment. Flowers appeared without occasion. Messages were sent just to say, "I'm thinking of you." Small touches carried reassurance. Love had become intentional. At the university, Samuel's team presented their project. It wasn't flawless, but it was united. When questioned about challenges, Samuel did something unexpected. "We struggled," he said honestly, "because we didn't always treat each other with patience. But we learned that collaboration only works when respect comes first." Later, a lecturer pulled him aside. "Most students protect their image," she said. "You protected your team." Samuel nodded. Love doesn't seek its own. That year, their group became known not just for results, but for unity. Friendships deepened where rivalry once lived. At Grace's office, tension had noticeably decreased. People helped without being asked. Mistakes were corrected, not punished. Meetings ended with clarity, not resentment. During a company retreat, someone asked Grace, "What changed?" She answered simply, "We chose people over pride." That answer stayed with many, because love, when practiced consistently, redefines culture. Here is the gathering that changed everything. Towards the end of the year, the church hosted a small New Year's Eve crossover gathering, this time focused on reflection rather than noise. Families came. Students came. Colleagues came. Daniel and Miriam stood together, hands clasped. Samuel sat beside his teammates. Grace sat quietly, listening. The speaker read aloud, "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God. And everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. He who does not love does not know God, for God is love." Silence followed. Then came a gentle call, not to shout but to respond. To lay aside bitterness. To forgive offenses from past years. To love as Christ has loved us. Tears flowed. Hands were held. Apologies were whispered. Because love had reached its climax, not in emotion but in surrender. In that moment, it became clear. Christ was not an idea. He was not a slogan. He was the reason love had survived homes, friendships, teams, and workplaces. He had taught them that love is patient in marriage. Love is kind among friends. Love is humble in teamwork. Love is gracious in leadership. And above all, love is sacrificial. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. When the countdown ended and the new year arrived, it did not feel like an escape from the past. It felt like a continuation of healing. Daniel kissed Miriam's forehead. Samuel laughed freely with his friends. Grace breathed deeply, unburdened. Aggression had not won. Hatred had not endured. Love had. Because Christ is love, and love, when chosen daily, transforms everything it touches. This year should not be remembered for success alone. It should be remembered because people loved differently. At home, among friends, in teams, in schools, in workplaces. And that love, rooted in Christ, becomes a light no darkness could overcome.